Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I would like to discuss how the government, most especially Boris Johnson and Priti Patel, are moaning about the so-called migrant crisis that they've actually created and how Tories are calling for them to deal with it by doing more of what made the problem worse in the first place. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So some of the Tory Sunday papers were trying to move us on from the subject of Tory corruption and on to good old-fashioned Tory and Brexit failure. The Sunday Telegraph said the migrant crisis puts Tories in peril. The Sunday Express says PM backed but told to solve the migrant crisis. Now this term migrant crisis is a bit of ambiguous, of course. There is a crisis, arguably, when you've got people having to flee war and persecution but facing a road made more dangerous by our government. But when these papers use the term crisis, the instigators are not the government in their eyes, but the poor buggers fleeing for their lives. So I'm going to begin by pointing out a couple of things that both the Tories and the Tory media get wrong on all of this. But because they don't care about either humanity or the law, I'm going to then move on and explain how actually it's their idiotic Brexit that's actually working against what they think are their own interests. Now, the first fallacy is that these are economic migrants. People coming here because our little isolated plague island is so amazing that of course everyone wants to live here. The Home Secretary Priti Patel repeated this lie again last week. We're not talking about economic migrants. Economic migrants come on via a ferry or a plane or a boat or through the train. We're talking about asylum seekers who need our help, and we have a duty to help them, no matter what the Tories say. The second incorrect statement is calling them illegal immigrants. They're not breaking the law. They are seeking asylum, and they are legally permitted to seek asylum here if they wish. If they have no legal right to seek asylum, then guess what? Their application will fail and they won't retain the right to remain here. So they're not illegal immigrants, they're asylum applicants. But the Tories and Tory press don't care about that. So let's move on to the situation and how Brexit and general government idiocy has made this mess worse. Now, I mean, before looking at some facts, just empirically look at the situation. Brexiteers like Patel and Farage told us that we needed to leave the EU in order to deal with what they said was the migrant crisis, even though there was no crisis at all. But now they say the situation is much worse. In terms of the numbers they're highlighting, it definitely is worse. So what happened to Brexit dealing with the issue then? Like, one of the headline stats is 292% increase in the number of people crossing the channel in these small boats with the purpose of seeking asylum. Now, depending on your outlook, that is either 3 times the size of the problem that you've been bellyaching about for ages, or 3 times as many people risking their lives because of our callous attitude towards these people. But why? Priti Patel is blaming the EU. Of course she is. It's all the fault of Schengen, she says, all these open borders. But hang on a minute. France has been part of the Schengen area since 1985. I mean, that's before the EU in its current form even existed. But the problem apparently has got much worse this year. 3 times worse, in fact. How is that down to something that was set up and France joined 36 years ago? If it's happened this year, has anything happened in the last year? What's happened in the last year that might actually have a bearing, do we think? I mean, we left the EU's customs union single market. Might that have had something to do with it? Well, this is nothing to do with trade, no indeed, but there's more to our former EU treaties than trade. One thing I tried to point out a few times before we left the EU is that a border has 2 sides to it. Brexiteers kept banging on about protecting our borders. That border has 2 sides. There is our side, and then in this particular case, there is the France's side. Now, a year ago, both sides were part of the single market. We had arrangements in place to manage the flow of asylum seekers fairly. Not directly related to the single market, separate treaty. In fact, I had to point out recently, the UK does not take anywhere near its fair share of asylum seekers. We take way fewer than many other European countries. I might stick the graph up again, or the chart. You know, Patel also claimed that she's pressing France to do more. Why should they? The Home Secretary struck an agreement early this year to pay for French authorities to help out, but she hasn't actually paid them. Frankly, it could be argued that they're actually doing more to prevent the build-up of refugee camps on the northern border than they have to. If you want the real reason why this so-called crisis is getting out of hand, don't waste time banging on about Schengen, which has been around for decades. Look at the Dublin Accord, which ended for us at the same time as this problem was getting out of hand, according to these ministers and people who shout at the sea. The Dublin Accord shared the load of asylum seekers across different countries within the EU. We exited that treaty. As a direct result, we are left completely on our own to handle all asylum claims that come our way. Completely on our own. This is a direct result of Brexit. Don't like all these migrants crossing the channel? Applauding Farage for shouting at the sea over them? Well, guess what? You voted for it. It's another classic example of people identifying something that they don't like without really understanding it and then convincing themselves that Brexit would deal with it. But in actual fact, it's not just that Brexit doesn't deal with it. It's that Brexit actually makes the situation worse. Seriously, how on earth was Brexit going to improve the situation? Well, we could control our borders. Control our borders? Do me a favour. Our borders are weaker after Brexit than at any time since the Dark Ages. And here's the thing. The Tory press are reporting that Tory MPs, particularly around Kent, are demanding that Johnson get a handle on the situation. They're demanding that he gets tougher on the problem. But it is their so-called tough approach that has caused the problem. Doubling down on it, that's hardly going to make the problem better. In fact, it'll make it worse. Patel wants the border force to basically murder these people by ramming their barely seaworthy boats. Well, they're not up for that. It's illegal, you see. Boris Johnson is reported to be exasperated. Now, I'm going to have to quote The Simpsons here, but my initial response to that was, how exasperated? Exasperated is when you've done everything you can and it's still not working. You go, why isn't it working? How is he exasperated? He's tried nothing and he's all out of ideas. So he's now appointed a minister to oversee the situation, Stephen Barclay, who runs the Cabinet Office. He's been told to oversee work on finding solutions. The same Tory MPs who are haranguing Johnson to do something are telling him that it's going to become a big electoral issue. Now, I'll be honest, I don't see how it will be. It doesn't make sense to me. The only reason it's seen as a big deal is because the Tory press keep banging on about it. Are they really going to do that as we head towards a general election if it might see the Conservatives lose vote share? I doubt it. But it doesn't matter about that. What matters is perception. If Tory MPs perceive that this is going to be an issue, they will behave as if it's going to be an issue. It will also be a self-fulfilling prophecy because it gives Labour the green light to poke at the government on the issue. So what's he going to do? He can't actually ram their boats without causing major international condemnation and the potential for international criminal proceedings at some point later on. I'm not sure that jet setters like Boris Johnson or Priti Patel will fancy going on holiday with one eye looking over their shoulder for Interpol later on. You know, they keep trying to move them overseas for processing, because that's the idea, isn't it? It's like, well, yeah, okay, we're fine with asylum seekers. We'll process them somewhere else, and if it succeeds, then we'll let them in. That way, it shows that they're being tough. The idea is not to allow them into the country at all until they've had a successful asylum application. But, well, first of all, that's not how the law works. But also, where do you carry that out? There was a report, I don't know where this came from, whether it came from Priti Patel or just someone in her department. There was a report that we're going to send them to Albania. However, it turns out that Albania had not been asked about this. So that was a little bit like saying Mexico would pay for the war, really. So all that's actually going to happen is that Patel will just rage at her officials for being too weak to just kill these people. She'll come up with increasingly insane schemes that are frankly illegal and keep making outlandish claims about how they're going to deal with it, like sending them to a country that hasn't actually given them permission, whilst not actually doing anything about the problem. Because the only way to actually manage this problem is, guess what? International cooperation. If we feel overwhelmed, and we're not overwhelmed, the numbers are not there to back up the concept that we are overwhelmed. But if they feel overwhelmed, I'm sorry you feel overwhelmed, Priti Patel, by the way, but if she feels overwhelmed, it would be a lot cheaper to just do the right thing than the wrong thing. Because at the moment, we're spending astronomical sums on this with her crazy schemes when it would be cheaper to just process them. We're spending a lot of money on her cack-handed management of the situation. But the way to actually do something productive is negotiate to bring us back into the Dublin Accord or a treaty that does the same thing for a third country, because we're not an EU country anymore. And whose fault's that? In other words, we need to reverse another bit of Brexit. But we won't get there with this current government, you feel. Like a Conservative MP, just to highlight it, a Conservative MP actually called for... His solution was to invade France to deal with the issue. I'm not kidding. You think I'm kidding. You think I'm exaggerating something. I'm not. Craig McKinley, who is one of the Tory MPs in Kent, he called for us to send British troops and police to northern France to deal with the issue. So we're going to invade France, are we? That's what we're going to do. Like I say, we need to get rid of these people before the problems actually start being solved. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And until next time, I'll see you later.